3 months after the first alien ships entered the solar system, panic was spreading through the Galactic Council faster than their fastest starships could travel. High Arbiter Zethkar stood in his private chambers, staring at reports that made no sense according to everything the Council knew about warfare and conquest. The human military had been crushed within weeks. Earth's orbital defenses had fallen. Mars had been occupied. The outer colonies had been scattered to the solar winds. By every measure of military success, the extermination campaign had been a complete victory. So why were his own forces reporting incidents that defied explanation? Zethkar's personal aide, a nervous creature named Velkoth, entered the chamber carrying a data pad filled with the latest reports from the fleet. His 4 eyes darted around the room as if he expected human soldiers to materialize from the shadows. High Arbiter, Velkoth began, his voice trembling. The fleet commanders are requesting immediate medical assistance. The incidents are spreading to ships that never encountered human forces directly. Zethkar snatched the datapad and read through the reports with growing horror. Equipment malfunctions that followed no logical pattern. Security systems that activated against their own crews. Automated factories that began producing objects that served no purpose but somehow filled observers with inexplicable dread. "Explain to me," Zethkar demanded, his scaled hands crushing the edges of the datapad, "how destroyed human ships are more dangerous than living human ships." Velkoth's skin changed color in patterns that indicated extreme distress. The science division believes the humans weaponized their own biological materials. When their ships were destroyed, microscopic agents were released that our systems cannot detect. They're not attacking our bodies directly, High Arbiter. They're attacking our minds. The concept was alien to Zethkar's understanding. His species had evolved beyond primitive emotions like fear, through millions of years of technological advancement. They had removed such weaknesses from their genetic code and replaced them with logical thought processes that made them superior to lesser species. But the human biological weapons weren't attacking their current evolutionary state. They were reactivating ancient genetic sequences that the aliens had suppressed but never completely eliminated. Deep in their DNA, buried beneath millions of years of technological modification, lay the remnants of what they had been before they became civilized. Commander Alex Turner had volunteered for the most dangerous mission in human history when he led a small team of Special Forces operators to infiltrate a Council research station in the asteroid belt. His team had been presumed dead for weeks, but Turner was very much alive and working to gather intelligence on alien weaknesses. The reports were right. Turner transmitted back to Earth using a stolen alien communication device. They've made themselves emotionally sterile. They've removed fear, anger, hope, and every other emotion that we consider essential to being alive. But you can't delete 1 billion years of evolution. Those instincts are still buried in their genetic code. Turner's team had spent weeks studying captured alien equipment and personnel. What they discovered would change the nature of the war completely. The aliens weren't just technologically advanced. They were genetically modified descendants of species that had once been as chaotic and unpredictable as humans. They're not immune to biological warfare, Turner continued his report. They're vulnerable to it in ways they don't understand. The biological agents aren't making them sick. They're making them remember what it feels like to be afraid. His team had planted devices throughout the research station that used subsonic frequencies, specific light patterns, and targeted pheromones to trigger primal responses in alien nervous systems. The aliens had thought they had evolved beyond such primitive reactions, but evolution never completely erases the past. Back on Earth, Lieutenant Commander Beth Price coordinated the resistance from her command post in the ruins of New York City. The aliens controlled the surface, but humans had gone underground, turning the planet's cities into vast networks of tunnels that the enemy couldn't map or clear. They keep broadcasting surrender demands, Price reported to Admiral Burke's hidden command center. They don't understand that surrender isn't in our vocabulary. We either win, or we make victory so expensive that our enemies regret starting the fight. The alien occupation forces were discovering that controlling human cities was like trying to hold water in a net. Every building they cleared was reoccupied within hours. Every patrol they sent out faced ambushes from enemies who appeared out of manholes and disappeared into subway tunnels. Every piece of equipment they left unguarded was sabotaged in ways that turned their own technology against them. Dr. Linda Ross had established a secret laboratory in the Amazon rainforest where she analyzed captured alien equipment. Her discoveries were revolutionizing humanity's understanding of their enemies and providing new weapons for the resistance.
Their technology is incredible, she transmitted to the Human Command Network. But it's designed for efficiency and logical operation. They've never had to build systems that could survive contact with creatures actively trying to break them.
In creative ways, human engineers had always designed their equipment to be tough and adaptable because humans were notorious for using tools in ways their designers never intended. Alien engineers had never encountered such problems because their species had been logical and predictable for millions of years. Ross and her team began developing computer viruses specifically designed to exploit the aliens' assumption that users would behave rationally. The viruses didn't destroy alien systems directly. Instead, they introduced small elements of chaos that accumulated over time until the systems became unreliable in subtle but critical ways. Meanwhile, across the galaxy, alien crews were reporting incidents that their training had never prepared them to handle. Equipment would malfunction at precisely the wrong moment. Navigation systems would develop minor errors that led ships into dangerous areas. Communication devices would pick up signals that seemed to carry emotional content that their species shouldn't be able to understand. Captain Nick Davis commanded the last human naval vessel still operating in open space, the aptly named ship Persistence. His mission wasn't military victory because military victory was impossible. His mission was psychological warfare on a galactic scale. Broadcasting on all frequencies, his communications officer, Ensign Kate White, reported, "Every alien ship in the sector is picking up our transmission." Davis smiled as he began speaking into the microphone. He knew that millions of alien beings across the galaxy would hear his words and be unable to understand why those words affected them so powerfully. "This is Captain Nick Davis of the human vessel Persistence. We know you're listening, Council, species. We know you've won every battle and occupied every world. We know you think the war is over." His ship dodged alien pursuit vessels through an asteroid field as he continued his broadcast. "But you made one mistake in your analysis of human behavior. You assumed that defeat would make us surrender. You've never encountered a species that treats death as just another tactical option." The words were transmitted across subspace to alien ships throughout the galaxy. On each vessel, crew members heard the transmission and felt something they hadn't experienced in millions of years. It was a sensation they had no words for because their ancestors had eliminated the concept from their language when they eliminated it from their genetic code. They were feeling what humans called fear. "You wanted to eliminate humanity because we're unpredictable," Davis continued as his ship weaved between alien weapons fire. "But unpredictability isn't a weakness. It's the ability to find solutions that don't exist yet, to survive impossible situations, to turn defeat into victory through sheer bloody-minded refusal to accept reality." The transmission ended when an alien beam finally caught the Persistence and vaporized the ship in a brilliant explosion. But the explosion released more biological agents into space, and Davis's final words continued to echo in the minds of every alien who had heard them. On the core worlds of the Galactic Council, civilian populations began experiencing emotions they had forgotten how to process: anxiety about the future, excitement about possibilities, curiosity about things they didn't understand, and most dangerously from the Council's perspective, hope that things could be different than they were. Human biological weapons weren't just reactivating suppressed genetic sequences. They were reminding the galaxy's most stable species what it felt like to be alive, rather than just functional. They were teaching machines how to dream and showing perfect societies what they had given up in exchange for their perfection. And, with each passing day, more alien species began to ask questions that their governments had hoped they would never think to ask. Questions about why humans had to be destroyed. Questions about what made unpredictability so dangerous. Questions about whether a galaxy without chaos was really a galaxy worth living in. The Great Hall of the Galactic Council was silent as death. when High Arbiter Zethkar stood at the center podium. His massive form cast long shadows across the crystal floors, where representatives from 47 different worlds sat in perfect rows. Each being had traveled across the galaxy for this meeting, and they all knew what would be decided today. The fate of humanity hung in the balance, and the council had already made up their minds. Zethkar raised his forearms, and the room fell even quieter than before. His voice echoed through the chamber when he spoke, and every word carried the weight of absolute authority. He had ruled the council for 300 years, and no one had ever questioned his decisions. Today would be no different. "Fellow beings of the galaxy," he began, his scaled skin gleaming under the artificial lights, "we have studied the humans for 50 of their years. We have watched them grow and spread across their solar system. We have seen their wars, their violence, their endless need to fight and conquer. They are dangerous beyond measure." The holographic display above the chamber came to life and showed planet Earth spinning slowly in the darkness of space. It looked peaceful from this distance, but everyone in the room knew better. They had seen the reports. They had watched the videos of human conflicts. They had studied human history and learned about their capacity for destruction. "These creatures," Zethkar continued, "have turned their entire planet into a weapon. They have poisoned their own air and water in the name of progress. They have split atoms and created bombs that can destroy cities. They fight wars that last for decades, and they never seem to learn from their mistakes." Representative Colvin from the Tau Ceti system stood up to speak. His blue skin had a nervous shimmer as he addressed the council. "High Arbiter, perhaps we should consider peaceful contact first. The humans may be reasoned with." A rumble of disagreement filled the chamber. Zethkar's eyes fixed on Colvin with cold disapproval. "You speak of reasoning with creatures who cannot reason among themselves. They have been fighting wars since they discovered fire. They celebrate violence. In their entertainment, they train their children to be soldiers." The holographic display changed to show human military exercises. Soldiers moved across battlefields with precision and deadly efficiency. Their weapons were primitive compared to galactic technology, but their tactics were brilliant, and their determination was absolute. Every movement showed years of training and an acceptance of death that chilled the alien observers. "Look at them," Zethkar said, pointing at the display. "They do not fear death the way civilized beings do. They embrace it. They sing songs about dying for their causes. They build monuments to their dead warriors. This is not a species that will accept peaceful coexistence." Dr. Vel Shan from the Science Council stood to present her findings. Her tentacles writhed nervously as she activated her own holographic display. "My research shows that humans advance technologically faster than any species we have encountered. In just 200 of their years, they went from riding animals to splitting atoms. At this rate, they will have weapons capable of threatening our core worlds within 500 years. The chamber erupted in shocked whispers. 500 years was nothing in galactic terms. Most species took thousands of years to develop basic space travel. The humans were advancing at a pace that defied all known patterns of technological development. Furthermore, Dr. Velshan continued, their expansion into space shows the same aggressive patterns as their terrestrial conflicts. They have already established military bases on multiple worlds in their system. They are training soldiers in zero gravity. They are developing weapons specifically designed for space warfare. Zethkar nodded grimly. The humans represent an existential threat to galactic peace. They cannot be contained because they refuse to accept containment. They cannot be reasoned with because they value death over surrender. They cannot be ignored because they advance too quickly. The vote was called and representatives from 47 worlds raised their appendages in agreement. Only Colvin abstained. The decision was unanimous. Humanity would be eliminated before they could threaten the galaxy. While this decision was being made, Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the human cruiser Defiance, completely unaware that his species had just been sentenced to extinction. He was reviewing patrol reports from the outer solar system when Lieutenant Amy Carter approached with a confused expression on her face. "Captain," she said, holding a datapad, "we're receiving some kind of broadcast from outside the system. The computer says it's in multiple alien languages, but the translation program is having trouble with it. Jake felt his heart rate increase. First contact with alien species had been humanity's dream for centuries. "Put it through the main speakers," he ordered. The bridge filled with strange sounds as the alien broadcast played. Clicks, whistles, and deep rumbling tones mixed together, in patterns that clearly represented language but followed no human linguistic rules. The translation computer worked frantically to decode the meaning. After several minutes, text began appearing on the main screen. The translation was rough, but the meaning was clear enough. The message spoke of a galactic council and a decision that had been made. It mentioned humans specifically and used words like threat and elimination. Amy Carter's face went pale as she read the translation. "Captain, I think they're talking about exterminating us." Jake read the message again, hoping he had misunderstood. But there was no mistaking the intent. An alien civilization had studied humanity and decided they were too dangerous to exist. Even worse, the message indicated that action would be taken within days. "Get me Admiral Burke at Luna Command," Jake ordered. "Priority 1 emergency channel." The communication came through within minutes. Admiral Henry Burke's weathered face appeared on the main screen, his gray hair disheveled and his eyes sharp with concern. He had received the same broadcast and was already assembling his staff. "Jake," the Admiral said without preamble, "how fast can you get the Defiance back to Earth?" 18 hours at maximum burn, sir." "Make it 12. We're calling an emergency meeting of all fleet commanders. If this broadcast is genuine, we have less than 48 hours before the largest military force in galactic history arrives to wipe us out." Jake felt a cold knot form in his stomach. Humanity had always wondered if they were alone in the universe. Now they knew they were not alone, and they had apparently made a very bad first impression. The Defiance changed course and began burning toward Earth at speeds that pushed the ship's engines to their limits. Jake watched the stars stream past and wondered if humanity's first contact with alien life would also be their last. The emergency meeting at Luna Command brought together every senior military officer humanity could reach in time. Admiral Henry Burke sat at the head of the long table, his fingers drumming nervously on the metal surface as reports came in from across the solar system. General Lisa Park represented the Army forces while Admiral Richard Stone commanded the Deep Space Fleet. Dr. Patricia Wells, humanity's leading expert on theoretical alien technology, sat beside them with stacks of research, papers scattered around her chair. The room buzzed with tense conversation as more officers arrived. Captain Jake Morrison had made the journey from the outer system in record time, and now sat with dark circles under his eyes from the stress of the past 24 hours. Everyone present understood that they were planning for the most important battle in human history against an enemy they knew almost nothing about. "Ladies and gentlemen," Admiral Burke began, his voice cutting through the chatter, "we have confirmed that the alien broadcast is genuine. Our deep space sensors have detected massive energy signatures moving toward our solar system. The enemy fleet will arrive in approximately 36 hours. A heavy silence fell over the room. 36 hours to prepare for a war against aliens, who had technology far beyond anything humanity possessed. Dr. Wells cleared her throat and activated a holographic display showing her analysis of the alien broadcast. "Based on the energy patterns in their transmission," she explained, "their technology appears to be at least 300 years ahead of ours. They have faster-than-light travel, energy shields that can deflect solar radiation, and weapons capable of destroying planets. In a direct military confrontation, we cannot win." General Park leaned forward with a grim expression. "Then we don't fight them directly. We use what we're good at. Humanity has never been the strongest or the fastest species on Earth, but we learned to survive by being smarter and more stubborn than everything trying to kill us." Admiral Stone nodded in agreement. "Our ships may be slower, but we have more of them. Our weapons may be weaker, but we know how to use them effectively. Most importantly, we have something these aliens apparently don't understand." "What's that?" asked Captain Morrison. "The willingness to die fighting rather than surrender," Stone replied. "Every war in human history has been won by the side that refused to give up, even when victory seemed impossible." Burke activated the YO tactical display showing the positions of human forces throughout the solar system. Red dots represented military ships, while blue dots showed civilian evacuation vessels. The aliens would expect to find panicking humans fleeing in whatever ships they could find. Instead, they would discover that humanity had been preparing for this possibility for decades. Operation Last Stand goes into effect immediately, Burke announced. All civilian ships are to evacuate to the outer system, but they're not running away. They're getting into position for the second phase of our defense. Dr. Wells looked confused. What second phase? Our analysis shows that conventional weapons will be useless against their technology. Burke smiled grimly. Dr. Wells, you've been studying alien technology. Have you been studying alien biology? Well, yes, but we only have theoretical models based on the fact that they've apparently lived in space for so long that they've forgotten how dangerous planets can be. Burke interrupted. These aliens have been traveling between stars for thousands of years. They've probably never encountered diseases, never dealt with biological warfare, never faced an enemy that used living organisms as weapons. The room fell silent as the implications became clear. Humanity's greatest advantage was not their technology or their military tactics. It was their biology. Humans had evolved on a planet where everything was trying to kill them, from microscopic bacteria to massive predators. They had developed immune systems capable of fighting off countless diseases, and they had learned to weaponize those same diseases against their enemies. Dr. Susan Hayes from the Biological Warfare Division was brought into the meeting via secure communication from her laboratory on Europa. Her face appeared on the main screen, pale but determined. "Admiral," she reported, "we've been analyzing the energy signatures from the alien broadcast. Their ships appear to be completely sterile environments. No biological contamination of any kind. Their crews have probably never been exposed to Earth-based pathogens." "How long would you need to prepare biological agents?" Burke asked. "The agents are already prepared, sir. We've been working on them for years as part of the planetary defense protocols. Airborne viruses, bacterial infections, fungal spores that can survive in vacuum. All of them designed to activate only after specific trigger conditions are met." Captain Morrison began to understand the plan. "You're going to turn our own evacuation fleet into a weapon. Every refugee ship will carry more than desperate humans," Burke confirmed. "They'll carry biological agents that will activate when the ships are captured or destroyed. The aliens will think they're eliminating fleeing civilians, but they'll actually be exposing themselves to weapons their immune systems can't handle." General Park pulled up manufacturing reports on her tablet. "What about ground defenses? If their ships get through our fleet, they'll try to land troops on Earth and Mars." "That's where Operation Mousetrap comes into play," Burke replied. "We've been digging tunnels and bunkers for 50 years, supposedly for asteroid impact protection. Every major city on Earth and Mars is connected by underground networks that the aliens can't map from orbit." Admiral Stone activated another display showing the positions of human ships near the outer planets. "Our deep space fleet won't engage them directly. Instead, we'll use hit-and-run tactics, forcing them to waste ammunition on targets that appear more dangerous than they actually are." The plan was audacious and desperate, but it played to humanity's strengths. Humans had always been survivors, not because they were the strongest or the smartest, but because they refused to accept defeat, even when victory seemed impossible. Colonel Steve Thompson joined the meeting from Mars Command, his red dusty uniform evidence of the frantic preparations taking place on the Red Planet. "Admiral, we've activated the Mars Defense Network. Every mining operation for the past 20 years has been secretly installing fusion charges throughout the planet's crust. If they want Mars, they'll have to take it one radioactive crater at a time." Burke nodded approvingly. "Remember, everyone, we're not trying to defeat them militarily. We're trying to make them understand that destroying humanity will cost them more than they're willing to pay. Every ship they destroy needs to hurt them. Every planet they attack needs to fight back. Every human they kill needs to take aliens with them." Dr. Wells looked at the tactical displays with new understanding. "You're not planning a war. You're planning to make genocide so expensive that they'll decide we're not worth the cost." "Exactly," Burke replied. "These aliens have been living in a sterile, predictable galaxy for thousands of years. They've forgotten that some species don't go quietly into extinction. They're about to be reminded what it costs to fight creatures that evolved in hell and learn to call it home. The meeting continued for hours as detailed plans were finalized. Communication networks were established, weapon systems were activated, and evacuation procedures were put into motion. As the officers dispersed to their commands, each carrying orders that would determine humanity's fate, Burke remained behind to watch the tactical displays. In 34 hours, the most advanced military force in the galaxy would arrive expecting to find primitive humans cowering in fear. Instead, they would discover that humanity had spent their entire evolutionary history learning how to kill things that were bigger, stronger, and more dangerous than they were. The aliens had made one critical error in their analysis of human behavior. They assumed that fear of death would make humans surrender. They had never encountered a species that used fear of death as motivation to fight harder. The alien fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the solar system, like a swarm of metal insects emerging from the darkness between stars. Commander Kyle Rogers watched from his fighter cockpit as the enemy ships materialized. On his sensors, their massive forms dwarfing anything humanity had ever built. The lead dreadnought alone was larger than most human space stations, and it bristled with weapons that could crack planets in half. "Holy shit," whispered Lieutenant Dan Price over the communication channel, his voice barely audible above the hum of the fighter squadron's engines. "Watch your language, Dan," Rogers replied, though his own hands were shaking as he gripped the controls of his small fighter. "Remember, we're not here to win a dogfight. We're here to make them waste ammunition and show them that humans don't run away from impossible odds." The alien fleet moved with mechanical precision toward the inner solar system, their formation perfect and their advance unstoppable. Admiral Burke's voice crackled through the communication system from Luna Command, his words carrying across the void to every human ship in the solar system. "All units, this is Admiral Burke. The enemy has arrived and they're exactly as dangerous as we expected. But they've made one mistake. They think we're going to fight them like civilized beings. They're about to learn that humans gave up on civilization a long time ago." Rogers checked his weapon systems one final time. His plasma cannons were fully charged, but he knew they couldn't even scratch the enemy's shields. That wasn't the point. The point was to make the aliens think he was more dangerous than he actually was, to force them to use their massive weapons on a single small fighter. "Squadron Alpha, begin attack run," Rogers ordered. "Remember, make it look like we think we can actually hurt them." 24 human fighters accelerated toward the alien dreadnought, their engines burning at maximum thrust. The aliens responded exactly as predicted. Energy beams lanced out from the massive ship, each one powerful enough to vaporize a city block. The beams tracked the incoming fighters with perfect accuracy, but Rogers and his pilots had been training for this moment their entire careers. "Evasive maneuvers," Rogers shouted as he threw his fighter into a spiraling dive that would have killed any normal pilot. The G-forces crushed against his chest, but his training held. Around him, other fighters danced through the deadly light. Their movements too chaotic and unpredictable for the alien targeting systems to track effectively. The aliens had never fought an enemy that treated suicide missions as standard operating procedure. They couldn't understand why these primitive fighters were attacking a ship that could destroy them with a single shot. Their computer systems calculated and recalculated, trying to determine what strategic advantage the humans were seeking. Rogers dove toward the dreadnought's main weapon array, his fighter screaming through space at speeds that pushed the little ship to its structural limits. Behind him, Lieutenant Price followed in perfect formation, his own fighter loaded with every explosive device they could fit in the cargo bay. "This is for everyone back home," Price said quietly as he armed his self-destruct sequence. The two fighters struck the alien weapon array simultaneously, their nuclear explosions bright enough to be seen from Earth. The blasts didn't destroy the alien weapons, but they did something more important. They proved that humans were willing to die to hurt their enemies, even when that death accomplished nothing more than scratching the paint on an enemy ship. Meanwhile, on Mars, Colonel Steve Thompson crouched in his underground bunker as alien troops marched across the red surface above him. The beings moved with the confidence of a species that had never encountered serious resistance. Their energy shields glowed softly in the thin Martian atmosphere, and their weapons hummed with deadly power. Thompson watched through his periscope as thousands of alien soldiers advanced in perfect formation toward what they believed was the main human settlement on Mars. They had no way of knowing that the settlement was actually a carefully constructed trap, built over a network of fusion mines that had been placed over the course of 20 years. "All units," Thompson whispered into his communicator, "prepare for Mars Protocol 7. Across the planet, hidden human forces checked their equipment one final time. They had been preparing for this moment since the first human colony ships had arrived on Mars. Every building was rigged with explosives. Every tunnel was equipped with biological warfare dispensers. Every piece of equipment was designed to cause maximum damage when destroyed. The aliens reached the outer perimeter of the settlement and began their assault. Energy beams carved through the empty buildings while ground troops advanced with methodical efficiency. They expected to find terrified human civilians hiding in basements and storage areas. Instead, they found motion sensors connected to nuclear warheads. The first explosion vaporized 3 city blocks and caught the alien forces completely off guard. Before they could react, secondary explosions rippled across the settlement as every building detonated in sequence. The aliens' energy shields protected them from the initial blasts, but they couldn't protect against what came next. Hidden dispensers throughout the settlement released clouds of biological agents into the Martian atmosphere. Bacteria and viruses that had been specifically engineered to survive in the harsh conditions of Mars began to settle on the alien troops' equipment and eventually penetrate their environmental suits. Thompson smiled grimly as he watched the enemy forces retreat in confusion. They had expected military resistance and had prepared for conventional weapons. They had not prepared for an enemy that turned entire planets into biological warfare laboratories. On Europa, Dr. Susan Hayes worked frantically in her hidden laboratory as alien ships began scanning the moon's surface. Her team had spent years developing the most dangerous biological weapons in human history, and now they finally had test subjects to use them on. "The airborne agents are ready for deployment," she reported to Earth Command. "Once we release them into the evacuation fleet, every alien ship that captures or destroys one of our vessels will be exposed to pathogens their immune systems have never encountered." The evacuation fleet was already in motion. Thousands of human ships fleeing toward the outer solar system in apparent panic. To alien sensors, they looked like desperate refugees carrying nothing more dangerous than frightened families and personal belongings. In reality, each ship carried biological warfare agents that would activate only after the ship was breached or destroyed. The aliens would think they were eliminating fleeing civilians, but they would actually be exposing themselves to weapons that could spread through their entire fleet. Captain Dan Mitchell commanded one of the evacuation vessels, his ship packed with apparent refugees but actually carrying a cargo more dangerous than any nuclear weapon. He watched on his sensors as alien interceptors moved to cut off his escape route. "This is Captain Mitchell to all evacuation vessels," he broadcast on an open channel that he knew the aliens were monitoring. "We're trapped. They're going to destroy us all. God help our families." The transmission was designed to sound desperate and defeated, exactly what the aliens expected from inferior beings facing extinction. They had no way of knowing that Mitchell was following a carefully rehearsed script designed to make them overconfident. The alien interceptors opened fire with weapons that could have powered entire human cities. Mitchell's ship exploded in a brilliant fireball that scattered debris across thousands of kilometers of space. Hidden within that debris were microscopic biological agents that would soon begin the next phase of humanity's counterattack. Similar scenes played out across the solar system as the alien fleet advanced toward Earth. Every human ship they destroyed released its hidden cargo into space. Every planetary defense they overcame exposed them to new biological threats. Every victory they achieved made them more vulnerable to weapons they couldn't detect or understand. The aliens had planned for military resistance. They had prepared for technological challenges. They had not prepared for an enemy that weaponized death itself, turning every defeat into a delayed victory and every destroyed ship into a biological time bomb. Admiral Burke watched the tactical displays from his command center beneath the lunar surface, his weathered face grim but determined. The first phase of humanity's defense was proceeding exactly as planned. The aliens were winning every battle, but they were unknowingly losing the war with each victory. Phase 1 complete, he announced to his staff. Now we wait and see how long it takes them to realize they're not fighting a military force. They're fighting a plague with spaceships. 1 year after the Purge fleet had departed for human space, High Arbiter Zethkar found himself facing something no Galactic Council leader had experienced in recorded history. The great chamber that had once been a model of perfect order now buzzed with arguments, debates, and something even more disturbing to his ancient sensibilities: spontaneous laughter. Representative Veltar of the Andromedan Collective stood at his speaking platform, his normally pale blue skin flushed with colors that indicated emotions his species hadn't displayed for thousands of years. Around the chamber, delegates from dozens of worlds watched with expressions that would have been impossible before the human war began. High Arbiter, Veltar declared, his voice carrying inflections that made Zethkar's scales crawl with discomfort. I move that this council formally acknowledge its error in ordering the extinction of the human species. A ripple of shocked gasps filled the chamber. In 10,000 years of galactic governance, no representative had ever suggested that the council could make errors. The very concept was alien to their understanding of proper civilization. Zethkar's forearms trembled with rage as he responded. Representative Veltar, you have been infected with human chaos. You are not thinking clearly. The extermination order was necessary to preserve galactic stability. What stability? Veltar shot back, his voice rising with what humans would have recognized as passionate conviction. We've spent the last year watching our own populations rediscover emotions. We thought we're extinct. Our young are asking questions about why they can't explore dangerous ideas. Our scientists are requesting permission to conduct chaotic experiments. Our artists are creating works that don't follow logical patterns. Around the chamber, other representatives began to speak without waiting for permission to address the assembly. Representative Colvin from the Tau Ceti system had tears streaming down his blue face as he described how his people had begun writing poetry for the first time in millennia. The delegate from Wolf 359 was laughing as she explained how her species had rediscovered the concept of practical jokes. The humans have infected us with life itself, declared Representative Morshan from the Galactic Core Worlds. And I find myself grateful for the infection. Zethkar pounded his ceremonial staff against the floor, the sound echoing through the chaos like a death knell for the old order. You speak of gratitude for contamination. You celebrate the destruction of everything our ancestors built. This is exactly why the humans had to be eliminated. But they weren't eliminated, Veltar replied quietly. Were they, High Arbiter? The chamber fell silent as every being present turned to stare at Zethkar. For the first time in his 300-year reign, the High Arbiter found himself unable to meet the eyes of his subordinates. The truth was too terrible to acknowledge but too obvious to deny. On Earth, Admiral Henry Burke stood in the ruins of his former command center, looking up at a sky filled with alien ships that had arrived not as conquerors but as refugees. His weathered face showed the strain of the past year, but his eyes held something that surprised the alien observers: satisfaction rather than triumph. Captain Ellen Wright had commanded the first human diplomatic vessel to enter Galactic Council space since the war began. Her mission had been the most dangerous yet, not to fight aliens but to negotiate with beings who were rediscovering what it meant to feel alive. Admiral, Wright reported via secure communication from the council chambers, you need to see this. They're not just asking for peace terms, they're asking us to teach them how to be chaotic. Burke laughed, a sound that would have been completely incomprehensible to the aliens just 1 year earlier. Captain, tell them that chaos isn't something you teach, it's something you survive. And survival is humanity's greatest skill. The diplomatic negotiations that followed were unlike anything in galactic history. Instead of discussing surrender, terms, or territorial concessions, the aliens were asking humans to explain concepts that civilized species had abandoned millions of years ago. They wanted to understand creativity, humor, hope, and most importantly, the willingness to take risks for uncertain rewards. Dr. Carl Johnson, humanity's new ambassador to the reformed Galactic Council, found himself in the unprecedented position of explaining human nature to beings who had forgotten what nature meant. He stood before the assembled representatives with no weapons, no threats, and no demands for compensation. Instead, he carried only words that would reshape the galaxy's understanding of what it meant to be alive. "You tried to eliminate humanity because you feared our unpredictability," Johnson began, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber's acoustics. "But unpredictability is just another word for potential. The potential to solve problems that don't have solutions yet. The potential to dream of futures that don't exist yet. The potential to become more than what evolution originally designed you to be." He gestured toward the diverse alien representatives, many of whom were displaying emotions their species hadn't felt for geological ages. "You've spent millions of years creating a perfect, stable, predictable galaxy. But perfection is death. It's the end of growth, the end of possibility, the end of hope." Representative Colvin raised one of his 4 hands to speak. "Ambassador Johnson, how do we learn to live with uncertainty? Our ancestors eliminated chaos because it caused suffering and conflict." Johnson smiled with an expression that the aliens were beginning to understand meant not mockery, but genuine warmth. "Colvin, suffering and conflict aren't bugs in the system of life. They're features. They're what drive growth, creativity, and the development of solutions to problems you didn't know you had." The questions continued for hours as alien representatives struggled to understand concepts their species had abandoned. How do you make decisions when you don't have complete information? How do you pursue goals that might be impossible to achieve? How do you find meaning in existence when that existence is temporary and uncertain? The answer, Johnson explained, is that you don't find meaning. You create it. Every day, in every choice you make, in every risk you take, in every moment when you choose to hope for something better, despite having no guarantee that better is possible. Meanwhile, across the galaxy, the changes that had begun with human, biological warfare were accelerating beyond anyone's ability to control them. Species that had been stable for millions of years were experiencing cultural revolutions as their populations rediscovered curiosity, creativity, and the dangerous joy of exploring unknown possibilities. On the industrial world of Kepler 442b, workers who had performed the same tasks for thousands of years began experimenting with new techniques and asking questions about why things were done in specific ways. Their productivity initially dropped as they wasted time on activities that served no logical purpose. But then it soared as they discovered more efficient methods that no one had ever thought to try. On the research stations orbiting Proxima Centauri, scientists who had followed rigid experimental protocols for centuries began conducting what they called chaotic research, investigating phenomena that had no practical applications but satisfied something their species was just beginning to understand: curiosity for its own sake. The changes weren't universally welcomed. Conservative factions on many worlds demanded that their governments find ways to reverse the human contamination and return to the stability of the past. But the contamination had spread too far and taken root too deeply to be easily removed. Dr. Susan Hayes, now serving as humanity's chief biological warfare specialist turned cultural ambassador, found herself in the unique position of explaining to alien scientists how to safely manage the emotions their species was rediscovering. "The key," she explained to a gathering of galactic medical experts, "is not to fight the changes but to learn to live with them. Fear isn't your enemy. Uncertainty isn't a disease to be cured. These emotions are tools that evolution gave you to navigate a universe that doesn't care about your survival." The final vote came after months of debate that would have been impossible under the old system of galactic governance. By a margin that surprised even the human observers, the reformed Galactic Council voted not just to spare humanity, but to fundamentally restructure galactic civilization to allow for the chaos, creativity, and unpredictability that led to growth. Admiral Burke received the final transmission as he stood in his reconstructed command center, looking out at a solar system that now hosted more alien ships than human ones. But these aliens had come not as conquerors but as students, eager to learn what it meant to be gloriously, dangerously, chaotically alive. The Galactic Council, the transmission read, hereby grants humanity not just the right to exist, but the right to be humanity, chaotic, unpredictable, dangerous, and gloriously alive. In return, you have reminded us of something we had forgotten, that safety without freedom is just another form of death. The galaxy had tried to eliminate humanity to preserve its perfect order. Instead, humanity had taught the galaxy that sometimes the most important battles aren't fought with weapons, but with the simple, terrifying, wonderful refusal to stop being who you are, no matter how impossible the odds. And in the end, when humanity refused to die, everyone else learned how to truly live.